The Gators take on the Vols. Should Florida really be 10.5 point underdogs? Next on Read and Reaction, the articles. Hey, everybody, I'm Will Miles here from Read and Reaction. Welcome to Read and Reaction, the articles. Again, just remind you, if you want to see the on paper version of this, you can go to www.readandreaction.com. Check it out over there. If you want to support us, support what we're doing here, you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction. For as little as $2 a month, you can get extra things from Nick and I, and certainly get updates on projects that we're working on. We got some cool stuff coming up, hopefully coming up here in December, that we're going to be announcing relatively soon. So, hey, with that being said, let's get to the article right away as Florida goes into Knoxville to take on the Vols. Is Tennessee all that good? That's probably the key question to understanding what will happen when the Gators take on the Vols on Saturday night. I mean, I know that they're 3-0. I know that they defeated a Pitt team that's probably a borderline top 25 team, but does that actually prove that this Tennessee team is any better than the 7-6 squad from 2021? Obviously, a second year in Josh Heupel's system is a positive for the Vols. Heupel's teams have always scored a bunch of points, and his time at Tennessee is producing on that side of the ball as well. But it's easy to look good when you're playing Ball State and Akron. Of course, you could ask the same question of the Gators. After Anthony Richardson played lights out against Utah, Florida fans wished the lights had been out during the Kentucky and South Florida games, as ugly as they were. Still, the Gators are 2-1, will win over a team currently ranked 13th in the country, and a close loss to a team ranked 8th. It's an interesting question to ponder, but had the Kentucky and Utah games been switched in the Gators timeline, would we feel the same way about the team? After all, Richardson would have started out with an absolute stinker, but then righted the ship against the Utes. After a down performance against USF, the expectation would be that he could right the ship again against the Vols. Instead, it feels like everything is moving in a negative direction, and hope for an upswing is in short supply. The Gators have won 16 of the previous 17 meetings between these two teams. The game hasn't even been close since 2017, i.e. the heave to cleave game. And even in that one, Florida shouldn't have needed the bomb to win. But it hasn't been complete domination. There have been plenty of close games, but Florida has seemed to have a voodoo doll directly connected to Vols fans in those games that they've used repeatedly and cruelly. Franks to Cleveland, Greer to Callaway, Treon Harris's 10 points on 4 passes, Trey Burton for 80 yards. Tennessee is clearly perceived as a better team coming into this one, as evidenced by the Vols being set as 10.5 point favorites. But the last 17 years is a lot of history to overcome, and you have to wonder, does Tennessee have what it takes to slay those ghosts? Offensive tendencies. When evaluating Tennessee, I think it's worth taking a look at their schedule. They defeated Ball State 59-10 in their opener, but according to ESPN's FPI, the Cardinals are the 118th ranked team in the country. In their third game, the Vols defeated Akron 63-6, but the Zips are ranked 129th in FPI. Yes, Tennessee dominated, but they should have dominated. In between those two games against the bottom dwellers of the FBS was an overtime win over Pitt on the road. I suspect Florida will be 3-0 against that slate as well. And while the Heupel offense has been humming, let's look at the game against Pitt a little bit closer. The Vols offense only put up 91 yards rushing against the Panthers on 35 carries, and 27 of those yards came from quarterback Hendon Hooker. Pitt had the Vols on the ropes early, up 10-0, driving deep in Tennessee territory, when Pitt quarterback Keaton Slovis threw what was really a perfect pass where only his receiver could catch it. Except that receiver, Bub Means, allowed the ball to bounce off his hands, right into the waiting hands of Tennessee defensive back Trayvon Flowers. Tennessee then drove for a touchdown, and instead of being down 17-0, the score was just 10-7. Slovis went down later in the half. His backup played terribly, yet still Pitt was able to force overtime. One thing I pointed out that Kentucky took advantage of against Florida were some tendencies that the Gators showed on offense when they got to a certain down and distance. Looking at the film from Tennessee's game against Pitt, I think there are some things the Gators defense can key on as well. For instance, when Tennessee was driving down 10-0, you presume Heupel knew his team needed to sustain the drive to allow their defense, worn out at that point, time to refill the gas tanks. That means you're going to get their best plays on third and fourth downs. So what plays did they call? This play seems really simple. Tennessee had one-on-one coverage against their wide receiver, number 4, Cedric Tillman. Tillman beats the Pitt defensive back towards the inside, and it's an easy pitch and catch for Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker. Later in that same drive, Tennessee was facing a 4th and 3, and here's the play they ran. It's the same slant to Tillman, but this time Pitt runs its linebacker over towards the sideline and nearly into the passing lane. The DB does a better job in coverage, and they're able to knock the ball down. This is an opportunity for Florida. If this is what the Vols consider a bread and butter play, and the Gators linebacker or star can read it and cut underneath, this kid could turn into a pick six pretty easily. Additionally, I'd expect Jason Marshall to be matched up against Tillman. He's banged up, but listed as starting on Tennessee's depth chart, and he'll need to be uptight in these situations. The tendencies for the Vols become even more stark when you look at the throwing frequency chart against Pitt. This chart shows that Hooker threw short and right a ton. It also shows that he took a bunch of deep shots, 7 to be exact, to the right side. The distribution of yardage by location looks very similar. Tennessee wants to go to its right. This isn't just a one-game phenomenon. If we look at the same chart for the Vols in all of its games against SEC opponents in 2021, here's what we see. It's the exact same trend. Short and right is highly preferred. Deep shots only go to the outside. Basically, nothing goes down the middle, and certainly nothing is going deep down the middle. The Heupel offense lulls you to sleep by throwing screens and hitches and slants, and then once it gets you to overcommit to defending those, takes its deep shot. They hit 3 total deep shots against Pitt. One was a 32-yard touchdown toss to Brew McCoy. Another was a 61-yard pass to Tillman to the 1-yard line that turned into a touchdown. The third was a jump ball to Tillman in overtime. One thing you'll notice about the deep shots, though, is that they came on 1st and 10, 2nd and 6, and 2nd and 13. That's because on 3rd down, you're getting a slant to the outside right. We'll see if Patrick Toney and the Florida defense are ready for it. The quarterbacks. Hendon Hooker was good at Virginia Tech, quarterback rating of 159.8. He's been even better at Tennessee with a QB rating of 179.1. That's bordering on elite territory. He also is a running threat, though not as much as I might have thought, averaging 3.9 yards per carry over 435 carries. He can get a first down if you give him an opportunity, and Tennessee does design runs for him, but Hooker can do much more damage in the pocket. Anthony Richardson is the complete opposite. Last season, he had a QB rating of 144.1 in 64 throws, which is about average. But he was dynamic on the ground, totaling 401 yards on just 51 carries, 7.9 yards per rush. That continued against Utah, QB rating of 129.6, 9.6 yards per rush on 11 carries. And so it looked like Florida would get much what they got out of AR last year, just all game long. But against Kentucky, QB rating 62.9, and South Florida 85.6, Richardson has struggled with accuracy and interceptions. He also has not brought any value in the running game, 13 carries for 28 yards, and so Florida's offense has been anemic. Hooker is the better player by just about every metric. His yards above replacement, YAR, my proprietary stat that takes into account a quarterback's running and throwing, had him at 1.55 last year, which is very good but not quite elite. His YAR for 2022 so far is at 1.52, so right in line with what you would expect. Richardson's YAR this year is abysmal, negative 1.14, and is 3rd from the bottom of the SEC. But his YAR in 2021 was 2.51, which indicates that AR has a higher gear than Hooker, but is obviously much more inconsistent. And that's where I think the comparison starts to get interesting. If we look at predicted points added, or PPA, a measure of points added or lost given the outcome of a given play, here's what we see. Hooker had a fantastic game against Akron, but the Zips beat St. Francis 30-23 in overtime and lost 52-0 to Michigan State. They're a bad team. Other than that, Richardson has the highest performance, Utah, of the quarterbacks. But he also then has the 2 lowest performance of the 2 quarterbacks as well. This is why Vols fans aren't crowing about this winning this game yet. Richardson has the ability to be the best quarterback on the field, but he also has the ability to be the absolute worst. There's also one other thing to consider: pressure. At least against Pitt, Tennessee defensive coordinator Tim Banks decided to bring pressure in key situations. He did that in two ways and had mixed results. On this play, Tennessee brings its slot corner on a blitz, but it isn't a pure blitz as the Vols still only rush 4 men. Instead, they drop 2 linebackers into zone on the right-hand side. They know that on 4th and 3, Slovis is likely going to have a quick read. He double clutches because the linebackers get in his way, and before he can come back to the tight end who's open on the left side, he gets drilled from behind. This is a great defensive play call if the linebackers can get in the way of the quick throw. Most plays involve a quarterback reading right to left. The blitzing player is coming from his blind side. I suspect Richardson may struggle with this sort of look should Tennessee choose to run it, particularly in shorter yardage situations unless Napier and company have prepared him for the look. But if Tennessee gets greedy trying to get pressure, Richardson may be able to make them pay. On this play, Tennessee brings its safety on a blitz from the left side. This means that the other safety drops towards the middle of the field. Slovis immediately recognizes that this means he has a linebacker on his tight end running a wheel route down the field. Again, the read starts right to left, but the blitz can't get home because Slovis doesn't double clutch. Note, though, that Slovis got rocked on both of these plays. This has been the thing that's confused me about the commentary around Richardson running the ball. I think it's actually much more likely Richardson gets hurt on a play like this than one where he's running around and able to protect himself. Regardless, the plays I've diagrammed show that these sorts of plays provide opportunities for big plays, but also opportunities for catastrophic failures. And the opportunity for failures is where I start to get nervous because Richardson has been really bad against pressure. Thus far in 2022, Richardson has completed 27% of his throws for 2.5 yards per attempt when under pressure. That isn't just Kentucky either. He was 1 of 5 against Utah and 0 of 5 against USF. Woof. But give him time, and Richardson numbers are greatly improved. In those circumstances, he's 35 of 55, 64%, and averaging 6.7 yards per attempt. If you add 60 to 70 rushing yards, that's a good outing. This actually gives me more hope than I had immediately following the USF game, because when not pressured, AR was 16 of 19 for 153 yards against Utah and 10 of 13 for 111 yards against USF, sandwiched around 9 of 23 for 104 yards against Kentucky. That means that while the overall quarterback ratings in the Kentucky and USF games look similar for Richardson, he was much better against the Bulls. Richardson's inaccuracy against pressure isn't new. He was 5 of 17 for 142 yards and 3 interceptions last season in those sorts of situations. But he did hit 2 explosives and averaged 28 yards per completion. He hasn't hit those yet this year, but based on the Pitt film, Tennessee's going to give him an opportunity. We'll see if he can take advantage. Takeaway. I've outlined some ways in which I think Tennessee might be able to be exploited. But let's be honest, this just hasn't been a very good Florida team the past 2 weeks. That starts at the quarterback position where the Gators would be 3-0 with a close win over Kentucky and a sizable win over USF with just average play from the position. At least against the Wildcats, you could point to the defensive improvement. But with the way the Bulls just ran over the Gators, I don't have a lot of confidence when we look at the statistics in aggregate. Florida is going to want to run the ball. Thus far in 2022, Tennessee has been strong, 19th in yards per rush allowed. Yet that is against some cupcakes, but Florida just had a cupcake come to town and got dominated up front by USF. Coming into the year, I would have said that Florida had an advantage over Tennessee on defense because last year's unit was better and Todd Grantham was gone. But through 3 games thus far, that just hasn't been the case. Not only has Florida's defense been poor against the run, 104th, 5.3 yards per rush, but it's only been average 38th, 6.4 yards per pass against the pass. The result is that one major advantage seems to have evaporated. And then if you go to the offensive side of the ball, the gap is just enormous. Tennessee has been better this year, 12th overall in yards per play, and 44% better than last season, according to predicted points added on offense. Florida has been average on offense, 35th in yards per play, but that is all due to a running game that's better than last year. And even with that, the Gators offense has been 40% worse than 2021, according to PPA. So what we have is a Vols defense that has vastly outperformed Florida's defense, a Vols offense that has vastly outperformed Florida's offense, and Florida going into Neyland Stadium as 10.5-point underdogs. What'll it take for Florida to come out on top? Ghosts. It'll take the Gators linebackers stepping up with Ventrell Miller gone. It'll take multiple turnovers forced by the defense, likely at least one leading directly to a touchdown. It'll take a special teams blunder by Tennessee at some point, whether it's a blocked punt or a blocked field goal. And it's going to take Anthony Richardson figuring out how not just to turn the ship around, but to bail out the water that's gathered on the decks of the SS Richardson. That means Heisman level play. Vols fans are being cautious, at least publicly. On this week's Stand Up and Holler, Tennessee grad and host of That SEC podcast, Michael Bratton, said he expected Richardson to play the game of his life. Before we went on the air, I asked whether he was ready to exorcise some demons or get a giant kick in the groin because there's really no in between for Tennessee. But any Gators fan who tells you they're confident going into this one isn't being honest. The film says Tennessee wins. The stats say Tennessee wins. The only thing going against them is that they do seem to have some obvious tendencies on both sides of the ball that I've pointed out here. And they have to deal with the ghosts of past defeats that define the program really since Steve Spurrier came to Gainesville. Those ghosts do mean something. And if the game is tight, maybe Florida has an advantage. But ask any Gator fan whether they'd rather have Tennessee's statistical profile or rely on voodoo, and you'll know why I'm picking the Vols. Tennessee wins 34-20. Well, I certainly don't like that prediction. Obviously, I'd love to say that Florida's going to come out on top, but you look at the film and it's sketchy, especially when you start looking at the places where Anthony Richardson is going to have to improve. You look at the stats and it's staggering how far these two teams are after 3 games in. Now, Florida's played better competition, and that's maybe the saving grace, is you look at it and say, yeah, the Gators have struggled at certain times, but the Gators have played much, much better teams than Tennessee has. And, look, Tennessee's been back now for the last 10 years. It feels like every 3 or 4 years they get a new head coach in. That new head coach has them right on the cusp of being back. Florida comes in, absolutely stomps them, and then Tennessee's regurgitating a new coach, and Florida is off to the races and having a successful year. Could that happen? Absolutely. In fact, I think that is the thing that is going to keep us all watching. If this was Jeff Driscoll at quarterback, if this was Felipe Franks at quarterback, and the last 2 weeks it happened, we'd be saying, oh God, there's just no shot. But Anthony Richardson always gives you a shot. And that's one of the things that's exciting about this Gators team specifically is I think the highs are going to be really high this year. I think the lows are going to be really low. We've already gotten a taste of each of them, and we'll see what we get in Neyland Stadium this week in Knoxville. So thanks so much for tuning in. Again, if you want to support us, you can you like and subscribe. If you like if you like these videos and you like them, you hit the bell, you subscribe. That helps us in terms of the algorithm. That helps us in terms of building the audience. And quite honestly, that helps us with revenue as well from YouTube. If you want to help us directly with revenue, you can go to patreon.com/readandreaction and support us over there. But again, we just really appreciate all the support that everybody gives. We appreciate you listening to what we have to say about the program. Consider ourselves very privileged to be able to do that. And so looking forward to hanging out with some of you virtually, at least on Saturday when the Gators take on the Vols. And hopefully the Gators get it done despite what I've written here. So with that, until next time, go Gators.